The night of November 25th, 1120, was cold and clear. A new moon hung in the sky, casting a ghostly light over the bustling harbor of Barfleur in Normandy. The white ship, a magnificent longship, bobbed gently in the water, its white sails billowing in the light breeze. On board, nearly 200 of the most privileged and beautiful young people in England and Normandy were partying. They were the future of the Anglo-Norman world, and they were having the time of their lives. At the center of it all was Prince William the Aetheling, the only legitimate son of King Henry I of England and Duke of Normandy. William was a 17-year-old prince, dressed in silken garments embroidered with gold, surrounded by a throng of attendants and guard. He was the heir to one of the most powerful realms in Europe, and tonight, he was the life of the party. But the atmosphere was more than just festive. It was reckless. The ship was loaded with barrels of the finest wine, and as the night wore on, the laughter and music grew louder. William's half-brother and half-sister, Richard of Lincoln and Matilda, Countess of Perche, joined in the revelry. So did his cousin, Stephen of Blois, and a host of other noble youths, including Richard, the Earl of Chester, and his wife, Maud. The white ship was owned by Thomas Fitzstephen, a man whose family had served the English crown since the Norman conquest. King Henry had entrusted the ship to Fitzstephen with a solemn warning. "I entrust to you my sons William and Richard, whom I love as my own life." The weight of this responsibility seemed to mean little to the partygoers, who were more concerned with the wine and the fun. As the night deepened, the party became even more raucous. The captain, fueled by drink, boasted that his ship was so fast that it could outpace King Henry's vessel, which had already set sail for England. The idea of a race back to the kingdom was met with cheers and even more drinking. Some of the more sober guests, including Stephen of Blois, began to have second thoughts. Stephen, citing a sudden stomachache, excused himself and found another ship to take him home. A few others joined him, but the majority stayed, caught up in the excitement of the moment. Around midnight, the white ship finally set sail. The wind was favorable, and the ship moved swiftly through the dark waters. But the effects of the night's revelry were evident. The crew, still tipsy, struggled to navigate the ship properly. Within minutes of leaving the harbor, disaster struck. The white ship collided with a sharp rocky outcrop at the mouth of the harbor, punching a hole in its wooden hull. The impact was violent, and the ship began to take on water. Panic ensued. The Prince William was quickly ushered into a small lifeboat, but the chaos was overwhelming. The fine clothes of the nobles, now soaked with seawater, made it impossible for them to swim. The air was filled with screams as people were thrown overboard, their heavy garments dragging them down into the icy depths. William, hearing the desperate cries of his half-sister Matilda, made a fateful decision. He ordered the lifeboat to turn back to save her. It was a noble act, but it was also a fatal one. As the lifeboat approached, it was swarmed by other desperate passengers. The weight was too much, and the lifeboat capsized, taking William and everyone else with it. The next morning, the harbor of Barfleur was eerily quiet. Only one man survived the disaster, a butcher from Rouen who had been on the ship to collect a debt. He clung to a piece of wreckage throughout the night, his body wrapped in ram skins for warmth. When he finally made it to shore, he carried the news of the tragedy to the world. King Henry I, who had arrived safely in England, was devastated. His beloved heir, along with many of the future leaders of his realm, was gone. The sinking of the white ship was not just a personal tragedy, it was a political catastrophe. It would leave a deep scar on the Norman dynasty and set the stage for years of turmoil and uncertainty. The king, once a man of unyielding strength, was never the same after that night. The future of the Anglo-Norman world hung in the balance, and a new chapter in history was about to begin. Despite all this, Matilda was underwhelmed. Geoffrey, her husband, was 11 years younger than her, and the Normans saw the Angevins as barbarians. They thought the Angevins murdered priests, desecrated churches, and had terrible table manners. There was even a legend that the Angevins were descended from Satan's daughter, Melusine, who had married an Angevin count long ago. She had revealed herself as a devil during a mass, flown out of a church window and disappeared, but her evil blood still ran in the veins of her descendants. Closer to home, Geoffrey's great-grandfather, Fulk III the Black, was known for his brutality. He He was said to have burned his first wife at the stake in her wedding dress after finding out she had cheated on him with a goatherd. His reputation as a violent and perverted man spread far and wide. Despite this dark history, Geoffrey Plantagenet seemed like a necessary husband to Henry I. The king hoped that this marriage would secure the future of his empire. Matilda and Geoffrey didn't get along at first, and they often argued and spent time apart. But under Henry I's guidance, they eventually settled down and did their duty. On March 5, 1133, Matilda gave birth to their first son, Henry, named after the king. The baby was baptized in Le Mans Cathedral and placed under the protection of Saint Julian. But it would take more than a saint's protection to secure the child's future. In late November 1135, Henry I and his entourage arrived at Léons-la-Fort in Normandy. The castle and the surrounding forest had been a favorite place for Norman dukes to hunt. Henry, still strong at 68, planned to enjoy the hunt the next day. But that night he fell ill, and his condition worsened quickly. By the end of the week, it was clear that the king was gravely ill. According to a letter from the Archbishop of Rouen, Henry confessed his sins, beat his chest, and set aside his animosities. On Sunday, December 1st, after 3 days of prayer and almsgiving, the Archbishop anointed Henry with holy oil, and the king died. The king's body was brought to Rouen, where his entrails, brain, and eyes were buried. The body was then cut up, salted, and wrapped in ox hides to stop the stench. The process was so gruesome that it even killed the man hired to cut off the king's head with an axe. The political fallout was even worse. Henry I had failed to provide an adult male successor, leaving the Anglo-Norman realm in turmoil. 3 times in 1126, 1131, and 1133, Henry had made his barons swear to support his daughter, Matilda, as his successor. But as soon as the old king died, his subjects began to abandon their promises. In December 1135, Matilda's cousin, Stephen of Blois, was in Boulogne. Upon learning of his uncle's death, Stephen quickly crossed to England and proclaimed himself king in London. He then went to Winchester, seized the royal treasury, and was anointed by the Archbishop of Canterbury. The barons and bishops of England and Normandy quickly supported him, leaving Matilda, Geoffrey, and their young family disinherited. The idea of a female ruler was not appealing to many. Rumors spread that Henry had absolved his barons from their oaths to Matilda on his deathbed. Stephen, on the other hand, was a wealthy, powerful, and charming man in his early 40s. He had been raised at Henry I's court and was a favorite of the king. He acted quickly to claim the throne, and the barons saw him as a better choice than a woman or a toddler. Matilda, who was pregnant with her 3rd child, couldn't move as quickly as Stephen. Geoffrey, being an Angevin, was suspected in Normandy and England. Matilda's reputation wasn't much better. She was described as arrogant and had alienated many people. Her sons, Henry and Geoffrey, had royal blood, but a toddler couldn't rule. Matilda and Geoffrey focused on claiming the disputed border castles that Henry I had promised as part of Matilda's dowry. Meanwhile, Stephen began to rule, but he found it challenging. He relied on a small group of friends and failed to gain the support of powerful barons. He lacked Henry's ruthlessness and intelligence, and he alienated many who should have been his supporters. By 1136, Geoffrey started a war from Normandy's southern borders, which Stephen struggled to resist. Stephen's rule in England was also shaky. He lost the support of powerful barons like Robert of Gloucester, his own brother Henry, and Roger, the Bishop of Salisbury. His arbitrary rule and the dismissal of experienced administrators further destabilized the kingdom. Matilda saw this as an opportunity. In 1138, her half-brother Robert of Gloucester officially defected to her side. The following year, she appealed her case to Rome and invaded England. She set up headquarters in Bristol and began a civil war. Matilda attracted a coalition of disaffected barons, and the country split in two. However, she wasn't strong enough to defeat Stephen outright, leading to a prolonged period of war. In 1141, Matilda won a significant victory. Stephen had offended Ranulph, Earl of Chester, by granting lands to his enemies. Ranulph seized Lincoln Castle, and Stephen besieged it. Robert of Gloucester marched to Lincoln and attacked the royal army. In the battle, Stephen's troops were defeated, and he was captured. Matilda assumed the title of Lady of the English and tried to arrange a coronation in London. Many barons abandoned Stephen, but Matilda couldn't capitalize on her victory. She offended the barons with her arrogance and refused to give financial relief to London, causing the citizens to rise against her. She was chased out of the city in June 1141. Her brief victory lasted just under 8 months. She besieged Henry, Bishop of Winchester, but Robert of Gloucester was captured. To free him, Matilda had to release Stephen, undoing her victory. By late 1142, Matilda was besieged in Oxford Castle. Her husband, Geoffrey, was busy conquering Normandy and refused to come to her rescue. He sent 300 knights and their 9-year-old son, Henry, to help. As Christmas approached, Matilda grew desperate. One snowy night, she wrapped herself in a white cloak, slipped out of the castle, and walked 8 miles to Abingdon. She met friends there who helped her escape to the West Country. Her escape was a turning point in the war. Reinforced by fresh troops, Robert of Gloucester continued the fight against Stephen. However, the war lapsed into a violent stalemate. Stephen held the crown but was a weak king. Matilda was more powerful but discredited. The only significant action was in Normandy, where Geoffrey rapidly occupied the duchy. By 1144, he was recognized as Duke of Normandy, forcing barons with lands in both England and Normandy to acknowledge two lords. England and Normandy were crippled by the conflict. The country was split between two courts, one under Stephen and the other under Matilda. Law and order broke down, and the land was ravaged by violence. King David I of Scotland ruled parts of northern England, and the country became a patchwork of competing fiefdoms. Both Stephen and Matilda set up their own governments, but neither could guarantee the rule of law. Violence and chaos reigned as landholders turned to private defense, and the country suffered. The war had brought dark days to England. King Stephen's forces had ravaged the land, burning crops and homes, and leaving a trail of destruction. The Gesta Stephani, a chronicle from the time, described the king's cruelty. They took and plundered everything they came upon, set fire to houses and churches, and fired the crops that had been reaped and stacked all over the fields. They showed this bestial cruelty especially around Marlborough and Devizes, and they had in mind to do the same to their adversaries all over England. After a decade of fighting, Matilda, the rightful heir to the English throne, decided to leave. It might seem strange that she gave up the fight, but her work was done. Her children Henry, Geoffrey, and William were growing up in Normandy, and Matilda wanted to live out her remaining years in peace at the priory of Notre Dame du Pré near Rouen. She had already done much to help her husband, Geoffrey Plantagenet, capture important territories, and now she could enjoy the view from her new home. But Matilda didn't forget England. Her eldest son, Henry, was almost 16, and it was time for him to take up the fight. In 1149, Henry landed in Devon, ready to claim his birthright. This was his third visit to England, and he was determined to make a mark. He had a striking appearance, with a reddish, freckled complexion, a large head, and gray eyes that glowed fiercely when he was angry. He was brave and energetic, but also quick to anger. His father, Geoffrey, had taught him the art of warfare, and Henry had learned well. When Henry was just 13, he had attempted to invade England with a small band of mercenaries. It was a bold move, but it ended in failure. The young Henry had barely been able to pay his soldiers, and they deserted him. Stephen the king found the whole affair more amusing than threatening, and sent Henry back to Normandy. Despite this early setback, Henry's time in Normandy had been valuable. He had learned the complexities of feudal politics and the importance of alliances. He had also seen how his father, Geoffrey, had slowly but surely conquered Normandy, and he knew that he would need to be just as persistent and clever. In 1149, Henry's first task was to establish himself as a credible leader. He rode north to be knighted by his uncle, King David of Scotland, and then tried to attack York. Although this attempt failed, Henry managed to relieve a siege at Devizes and made important allies. He returned to Normandy with a sense of accomplishment. The following year, in 1150, Henry was formally made the Duke of Normandy. He paid homage to King Louis VII of France, solidifying his position. Then, in 1151, Henry's father, Geoffrey, died suddenly. Henry, now just 18, was left to carry on the fight for his family's ambitions. One of Henry's greatest achievements came in 1152, when he married Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor was a powerful and wealthy duchess, and her marriage to Henry brought him vast lands and resources. She was a remarkable woman, known for her beauty, her independence, and her political savvy. Only 2 months earlier, she had been the Queen of France, but her marriage to King Louis VII had been annulled because they had no sons. Eleanor's story was already full of drama. She was born in 1124, the daughter of William X, Duke of Aquitaine. When her father died, she became the sole heir to one of the largest and richest territories in Europe. At the age of 15, she was married to Louis VII, the heir to the French throne. Their marriage brought Aquitaine under French control, but it was not a happy union. Eleanor was a vibrant and worldly Southerner, while Louis was austere and pious. Their differences caused tension, and Eleanor was often blamed for the kingdom's problems. In 1147, Eleanor joined Louis on the Second Crusade, a journey that only added to the rumors and scandals surrounding her. She was accused of causing military disasters, and even of having an affair with her uncle, Prince Raymond of Toulouse. These rumors, though mostly false, damaged her reputation. By 1152, it was clear that their marriage was over. The French bishops declared the marriage invalid, and Eleanor was free to seek a new alliance. Eleanor knew she was vulnerable. She made a quick and dangerous journey from Beaugency to Poitiers, her duchy's capital, to avoid potential kidnappers. 2 powerful men, Theobald of Blois and Geoffrey Plantagenet the Younger, were said to be after her. But Henry, who had been watching the situation closely, acted swiftly. He married Eleanor in a secret ceremony in Poitiers, securing her lands and her support. With Eleanor by his side, Henry's position grew stronger. He was now not just the Duke of Normandy, but also the Duke of Aquitaine. The combined wealth and power of these territories made him a formidable force in Europe. Henry's ambitions were clear. He would not rest until he claimed the English throne. The path ahead was difficult, but the rewards were almost beyond imagination. Eleanor, the powerful Duchess of Aquitaine, had learned a lot about survival during her time at the French court. She knew that remarrying was essential for her future, but she wanted to choose her own husband. As she rode swiftly to Poitiers, she managed to escape her would-be kidnappers. She had one person in mind who could secure her future: Henry Plantagenet, the Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. Henry was a powerful and ambitious man, and Eleanor had met him the previous year during peace talks in Paris. There was a chance they had considered each other as potential partners then. Once Eleanor reached Poitou, she sent an urgent message to Henry asking him to come and marry her. Henry didn't hesitate. He cancelled his plans to invade England and set out to meet Eleanor. A few days later, they were married in a small ceremony at the Notre Dame la Grande Cathedral in Poitiers. The marriage was quick and quiet, but its impact was huge. Louis VII, the King of France, was furious. He expected Eleanor to seek his permission for her new marriage, but she didn't. This made Louis feel betrayed, and it created a deep rivalry between him and Henry. Henry's marriage to Eleanor changed the political map of France. He now controlled not only Normandy, Anjou, Maine, and Touraine, but also the vast Duchy of Aquitaine. This made him one of the most powerful men in Europe, controlling almost half of the land in France. To make matters worse for Louis, Eleanor quickly became pregnant with Henry's child, a son. This not only showed that Louis had failed to produce an heir with Eleanor, but also meant that Henry's son might one day rule a vast kingdom that included Normandy, Anjou, and Aquitaine. Louis's daughters would lose any claim to Aquitaine. Within 2 years, Henry's son would also inherit the English throne. In January 1153, Henry Plantagenet landed in England with a small army. He had been blown off course during a stormy crossing of the Channel and found himself near the town of Malmesbury. The town had already suffered greatly during the Civil War, and its walls and castle had been besieged multiple times. Henry was determined to capture Malmesbury and used his mercenaries to attack the town. The attack was brutal and violent, with arrows and rocks flying, and the townspeople fleeing for their lives. Henry's men even broke into the local church, killing the monks and desecrating the altar. King Stephen, who was already besieging the town of Wallingford, heard about Henry's attack and rushed to Malmesbury. Stephen's army was large, with many banners and knights, but the weather was terrible and his men were demoralized. They refused to fight, and Stephen had to retreat. This was a significant victory for Henry, and it marked the beginning of his successful campaign in England. Henry realized that the people were tired of war, and that his mercenaries were causing more fear than loyalty. He listened to the advice of the barons, and sent many of his mercenaries back to Normandy. Unfortunately, a storm sank their ships, and all the mercenaries drowned. Henry then focused on making peace with the barons and bishops. He promised to protect their lands and rights, both in England and Normandy, and held courts around the country to show that he was a fair and just ruler. One of the most important barons to join Henry was Robert, Earl of Leicester. Leicester was a powerful landowner in the Midlands, and had been loyal to Stephen for many years. His support gave Henry a significant advantage in the heart of England. Leicester was also a well-educated and experienced noble, and he became one of Henry's most trusted advisors. In the summer of 1153, Henry and Stephen met at Wallingford, a town on the Thames River. Stephen had been besieging the castle, which was loyal to Henry. Both sides were tired of the war, and there was a general refusal to fight. The barons realized that a battle would only lead to more destruction and land confiscations. Henry and Stephen agreed to talk and began negotiations for a lasting peace. The main obstacle was Stephen's son, Eustace, who had been raised to believe he would become king. Eustace was angry and frustrated that the war seemed to be ending without a clear winner. He went to bury St. Edmund's and burned and pillaged the town. Shortly after, Eustace fell ill and died, which was a significant blow to Stephen. Eustace's death made it easier for Stephen to consider Henry as his heir. Negotiations continued throughout the summer and fall, with the help of Archbishop Theobald of Canterbury and Bishop Henry of Winchester. In November 1153, a formal truce was agreed upon in Winchester. Stephen formally adopted Henry as his son and heir, and the great men of the land gathered in the cathedral to witness the ceremony. Stephen, who was described as a mild and gentle man, spoke with dignity and grace, declaring that he appointed Henry as his successor. "Know that I, King Stephen, appoint Henry Duke of Normandy after me as my successor in the kingdom of England and my heir by hereditary right. Thus I give and confirm to him and his heirs the kingdom of England." This marked the end of the Civil War, and the beginning of a new era for England. Henry Plantagenet was now the heir to the throne, and the kingdom could finally look forward to peace and stability. Henry II was crowned King of England on December 19, 1154, with his pregnant wife Eleanor by his side. The old Archbishop Theobald of Canterbury performed the ceremony, and the great bishops and nobles of England watched as a new era began. The people of England were hopeful, shouting, "Long live the King!" They believed that Henry, with his intelligence, determination, and passion for justice, would bring a better future. Henry's coronation charter promised to restore the rights and freedoms that were granted during the reign of his grandfather, Henry I. He aimed to remove harmful practices and work towards the common good of his entire realm. Unlike his predecessor, Stephen, who had pledged to return to the old laws of Edward the Confessor, Henry focused on the present and the future. Henry was a well-educated and multilingual king, speaking Latin and French. He was known for his boundless energy, often seen hunting and traveling through his vast lands. Chroniclers described him as accessible, witty, and a skilled warrior. He was fair to the defeated, harsh with the rebellious, and generous to strangers. He was a tireless advocate for peace, and a strong supporter of the Holy Land. Despite his love for travel, Henry needed a stable place for his growing family. His first son, William, was just over a year old when Henry and Eleanor were crowned. In 1155, they moved to the royal palace of Bermondsey, a short distance from London. The city was bustling with commerce, entertainment, and a diverse population. It was a place where Eleanor could visit often, and it must have reminded her of Paris, where she had once been queen. In September 1155, Eleanor gave birth to their second son, Henry. A year later, their daughter Matilda was born, named after the empress who had fought for the Plantagenet claim. Tragedy struck in June 1156 when their first son, William, died at the age of 3. He was buried with honor at Reading Abbey. Despite the loss, the royal couple continued to have more children, including Richard, Geoffrey, Eleanor, Joan, and John. While Henry was often away, managing his vast territories, Eleanor played a crucial role in England. She attended councils and acted as regent, ensuring that the kingdom was well governed in his absence. When Henry was at home, he traveled frequently, addressing the needs of his kingdom and enjoying his passion for hunting. He worked to transform hunting lodges into grand palaces, such as Clarendon and Woodstock, to match the luxury of any in Europe. Henry faced a daunting task: to heal a country ravaged by civil war. Under Stephen, royal revenues had plummeted, and the authority of the crown had weakened. Castles and lands had been given away, and the country was fragmented. Henry's coronation charter did not confirm the liberties or possessions granted by Stephen, declaring them illegitimate unless reconfirmed by the new king. He ordered the return of all castles, towns, and lands to the crown, and abolished the earldoms that Stephen had created. In many cases, he returned the lands to their holders, but his message was clear. All power and possessions now came from the Plantagenet crown. Henry's reign marked the beginning of a new era of stability and prosperity in England. He was determined to reimpose the royal authority of his grandfather and to restore the kingdom to its former glory. The people of England, weary from years of conflict, looked to their young king with hope and trust. Henry II's mission of reconquest was just beginning, and the future of the Plantagenet dynasty looked bright.